My son heard something on the roof last night. Police lights cover our living room as I type this. It was Christmas Eve, and we were all tucked into bed, like we should have been. That was when I heard a pounding sound coming from the ceiling. My wife, she rustled a bit in her sleep at the sound, but remained still. I, on the other hand, could not. I got up out of bed and went to go check on our son. When I got to his bedroom, he wasn't there, which scared me. I rushed out of his room and looked over the stairs balcony looking into the living room. And there he was. My son, standing in front of the fireplace, next to all the presents my wife and I had wrapped just an hour prior. Great, I thought. It looked like we'd get no sleep before we'd have to open presents. I journeyed down the stairs and made my way past the kitchen and into the living room. "Hey, champ," I said in a groggy voice. "Oh, what are you doing up so early?" My son turned to look at me and said, "I heard Santa Claus on the roof, and I wanted to come down and see him." I lifted a brow as I glanced at the presents he was steadily ignoring beside him. "Looks like Santa brought you a lot of gifts this year. You must have been a good boy." My son looked to the ground with a frown. "Why the long face, bud?" "Santa says that you wrapped those gifts yourself." "Oh yeah? You've talked to Santa, have you?" He looked back down at the floor. "He told me not to tell you." This had me a little worried. I wondered briefly if my wife had taken our son to a mall Santa, and that maybe he'd been drunk and spilled the beans about the magic of Christmas to our child. Don't listen to that Santa, buddy. Those presents have Santa's name on them. Now, how about we open gifts? I'll wake your mother up as soon as I make her a cup of coffee. Then we'll open these bad boys up, okay?" He hurried back to the fireplace, and I went to go brew my wife a cup of coffee. As I brewed the coffee, I could vaguely hear my son whispering something to himself. "Hey, bud, who are you talking to?" He turned around and said, "Santa." Suddenly, he fell to his knees and collapsed onto his palms. I looked over towards the fireplace and saw a long, slim, black and gray striped sweatered arm going down the chimney and out the fireplace with a long, fingered, bony hand wrapped around my son's ankle. I dropped the mug of coffee to the ground, causing it to shatter into pieces, and took a few steps forward, but it was all fruitless. The chimney, the fireplace, it absorbed my son, pulling him upwards into it. His screams echoed off the bricks until the only thing I could hear was the pounding on the ceiling. No. The rooftop! I ran outside, ignoring my wife's yells from upstairs, and quickly peered up at the roof. Where a tall, scrawny old bearded man stood. His eyes were sunken in, and the eyes themselves were pitch black. Antlers extended out from his forehead, stretching out towards the night sky. He had a bulging sack over his shoulder. It must have been my son, squirming inside the bag for dear life. The bearded man looked over at me, put a finger to his lips, and then leaped to my neighbor's rooftop, and then to the next, and the next, all until he was out of sight. My wife ran outside to me and asked where our son was. I told her to phone the police, which she did. And that brings us to where we are right now. Police have questioned me repeatedly. At first, I gave them the true story of what had happened. When they didn't buy it, I changed my story up a bit, and they threw it up to me being shaken by what had happened. In the end, I told them that there had been a robbery and my son had been kidnapped as a result. What I told the police before, though, was that my boy had heard Santa on the rooftop. But I don't think it was Santa. It happens to those who aren't deemed strong enough in human society. The men in odd blue suits with red marks streaking across the stomach and chest come and take the one deemed unworthy away after their coming-of-age ceremony. Nobody knows their destination, except for the adults, it seems. For whenever the men come, the parents of the unworthy begin to cry. It is a sad spectacle to behold. Only one person was persistent enough about keeping his child that he resorted to following the takers. As a result, he was never seen or heard from again. We know the takers haven't caused him any harm. They never touch a soul. They just lead them to whatever destination holds the unworthy. The sun had just risen. The birds chirped, and everything was normal when I awoke. It was a good day. My 16th birthday, to be exact. I didn't know what form of employment they would schedule me in, but I was excited to find out. I mean, this was the day where I would come of age to be a man. I ran downstairs, but as soon as my foot fell on the final step, a loud knocking was heard on my door. I slowly approached. My parents were still asleep, and I didn't wish to wake them up. Slowly, I opened the door to meet with 6 tall men in blue suits. The first smiled with a kind face. He reached his hand out for mine to shake, and I obeyed his request, shaking lightly and greeting with my name. We are the Grimm Society, or Takers, as you call us. We have looked over your file and deemed you are not physically strong enough to give to society. My throat went dry when they said this. I didn't know how to respond. I gargled a bit, trying to choke something out, but Then 2 of the men grabbed me and tied my hands behind my back. They tied a long, red bandage over my eyes so I couldn't see. I cried out to my father to only the sounds of screams and sadness. My mother was screaming for my father not to let them take me, but I was hastily pushed into some kind of vehicle. The blindfold was removed. The first thing I saw was the kind face of the first man, and he smiled warmly and somehow gave me a bit of comfort to my current situation. It will be all right. It doesn't hurt for long. All comfort dried up, and I stared, completely shocked at this man. We will be there soon. Now act your age and face what you're about to see with dignity. I tried and tried to reason with him. I didn't want to do this. All I wanted was to go back home. To which he always replied with, "Face what's coming to you with some dignity." His face shifted from kindness to annoyance. He tied the red bandage around the back of my head, forcing it so I couldn't speak. I stared at the man fearfully, but looked out the window to see nothing but long columns of trees. I didn't know what to say, but they moved by getting taller and taller. All I could think about was home, how it was near Christmas time, and the thought of the arriving snowfall brought back so many memories. I began to sob lightly, thinking of all the good times with my family as we enjoyed the holidays. But that quickly ceased as the taker laid his hand across the back of my head. "Act your age," he He spat at me in disgust. I don't know what we began to drive on, but I knew it wasn't road. The van slowed a bit and the ground was blue. It seemed to be frozen solid. To my horror, I realized that we were driving on ice. I began to panic, thinking we were bound to fall through eventually. But we never did. Slowly we rolled onto snow and I felt a little safer, opposed to my current situation. The bandage was untied, and the man wrapped it around my arm, as if I was about to get a shot, which I did. The long needle was slipped into my arm, and an odd green liquid was injected into me. I felt something begin to mold my head. My ears began to grow larger and pointed. I cried out in pain as I shrank slowly, as well as the bones in my leg grinding, slowly making them shorten. I didn't know what was happening to me. The taker was laughing like it was all some sort of sick joke, and when we hit a sudden bump in the road, the taker said, "Poor Jim." I figured it was the man who had tried to follow them to get his son back. We continued on. The snow got deeper and deeper until it almost reached the van's windows. I was growing more and more afraid. My clothing fell off as I was almost half my original size. They wrapped a cloth around my waist, hiding away my private area. The van came to a jerking stop, and I fell out of my seat. The taker rose, which was the first sign of life in a while, only to grab me and throw me into the snow. The vehicle began to depart as the man uttered, "Have fun, boy." He left with a loud laugh. The cold crept up my back slowly until my entire body was blue. I couldn't stand with my new shorter legs. The movement was unbearably painful. I slowly began to drift off into sleep until I heard a soft, kind laugh. It was odd, but all I heard was, "Ho, ho, ho." "12 seems to be the age when kids start putting the heat on their parents about the truth behind Santa. I was certainly no exception to this rule. How were Santa's elves able to make that video game I wanted in their workshop? After all, I thought that Nintendo owned Mario. Or how about that ever-infamous visiting every house in one night question? Did the jolly old man own some kind of time-extending device? Or perhaps the most obvious question of all. How could he have lived for this long? A lot of people say he trains apprentices, who take his place every few decades. Others claim he's just immortal. As for everything else, magic seemed to be the universal lie everyone had agreed on. Whatever the case, I just went with the conclusion that it was my parents' doing. Of course, they denied it and claimed ignorance if I ever confronted them. But it wasn't enough to dissuade my beliefs. So one Christmas Eve, when I couldn't sleep as these questions danced among my dreams of sugar cereals and new video games, I decided to investigate the noises coming from my living room. This time, surely, I would catch my mom or dad in the act of stowing presents under the tree and stuffing my stockings full of goodies. At least, then, they'd let me in on the truth. But as I entered the living room, I saw a man before me that I did not recognize. He was dressed in red and white, with a slightly overweight body, and he wore a stringy, fake, white beard. His hair, or what remained of it at least, was graying around the edges of his classic Santa Claus hat, and his eyes were wide with fright as he dropped a present under the tree. Being the intuitive youth I was, I came to one of two conclusions. Either this was a home invader stealing my family's gifts, or this was the real Santa Claus. I opened my mouth to scream, but the man rushed towards me quickly and covered my mouth. "Shush, shh, shh," he said, putting a finger to his mouth, trying to smile. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I was petrified of this man. Then, slowly, he took back his hand and extended it towards me. "It's all right there, little one. You know who I am, right?" I nodded, not shaking his hand back. The trembling man nodded as well, then grabbed an empty sack lying on the floor and gestured to the tree. "Look, see? I bring gifts. Now, run along back to bed, or I might have to put you on the naughty list." He started drifting towards the deeper, hearty voice stereotypically associated with Kris Kringle. But I wasn't fooled. Regardless, I wiped my eyes and began to step back from the living room, trying to create some distance between myself and the stranger. The man simply watched, wiped his brow, and proceeded to approach the fireplace. I stopped and observed, confused as to how he was going to leave my house. Suddenly, a blast of green flames erupted from the chimney, causing the man to fall back to the floor. I couldn't see his face, but I'm certain it was twisted in fear much like my own. A massive, bony hand spawned from the fire, and the arm that followed was draped in raggedy fur. Then another arm, and then the skull of some wild creature with 2 large horns followed, nearly as large as the fireplace itself. The bones popped and snapped as it slammed its hands onto the floor. The entire monster was engulfed in the flames, yet it did not seem to burn anything in the house.
Eddie.
The monster declared, speaking to what I guessed to be the man on the floor. No, no! Eddie shouted back. I did my part, see? 10,000 houses, just like you said, right? 10,000. I did my part.
And yet, you allowed a human child to see you. You know the rules.
Look, I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Just, please, let me go, please. I delivered all the—
Let you go? Did you let that woman go, Eddie? I don't seem to recall you letting her go. This was your second chance, and you've wasted it.
What are you going to do? Eddie whispered. I could make out his quaking figure being overshadowed by the creature in the fireplace. The next sound to be heard was a crunch, with a soft beginning and snapping finish. I jumped as the sound repeated a few times, finally letting out a shaky breath. I prayed in my head that it wasn't what I thought. But when the creature reared its head towards me, I saw the red and white pants hanging from its mouth as it chewed on Eddie's corpse. Then watched horrified as it slurped up his legs like strands of spaghetti. I covered my eyes and tried to tell myself that it wasn't real, it wasn't real, it wasn't real. And after a quiet minute, I peeked between my fingers to see the monster staring back at me from the fireplace. The pace of my breathing grew quicker and sharper, my eyes unable to escape from the grasp of those empty eye sockets.
Now, run off back to bed, little one. Or else, I might put you on the naughty list.
My legs finally found the strength to leave, and I sprinted right from my parents' room, diving into the sheets with them. There wasn't a trace of the events of the night before when my family went down to the tree the next morning. There was even a little note. Next to an empty glass and a half-eaten cookie on the table. Have a Merry Christmas. S. Claus. As much as I tried to take in the warm, comforting atmosphere that came with Christmas Day, I couldn't stop watching the fireplace, terrified that the monster would return. At the very least, now I knew the truth about Santa Claus. Today is 2 days away from the anniversary of my niece's death. No one knows how she died, except for her mother, who passed away recently, and me. I don't know who to tell this to, but I need to tell someone. No one would believe me anyway. They'd lock me up just like they locked up my sister. I wouldn't blame them. I hardly believe what happened myself. Bethany was going to be 10 years old the day after Christmas, the year she died. She still believed in Santa. I thought that she was too old for that shit, but her parents thought it was cute. They did everything they could to keep her from realizing that it was all just a lie. Bethany loved Christmas, and Santa, and elves, and all that. She used to tell me about an elf that would hide in her house. I just thought that her parents must have been hiding an elf toy or something. But I asked them about it, and they said they didn't have any elf dolls. I thought they were joking. Bethany's stories about the elf started getting... how do I put it? They started getting stranger. She told me that one night she woke up to the elf sitting on the dollhouse next to her bed, watching her with its empty glass eyes. After that night, she said that the elf turned bad. She said it would move around her room, making strange noises at night. And she told me if she tried to get out of bed, the elf would run towards her and start biting and clawing at her feet and ankles. The elf, she said, had too many teeth, which were long and thin but not pointed. She said its nails were long and sharp like claws. Of course, I didn't believe her. But then, she showed me the scars and new bite marks. The bite marks were normal human-sized, but very deep and definitely with more teeth marks. That's when I started to worry. I didn't believe in the elf at that point. I thought maybe she was doing it to herself, and I thought that she might have been seriously mentally ill. I wish I was right. I told my sister about my concerns for her daughter. She was worried too, so she found a psychiatrist for her. I thought that would help Bethany. But as Christmas came nearer, she seemed to get worse. I was staying over at my sister's house for Christmas Eve, and Bethany asked me to sleep in her room to protect her from the elf. I said yes. I thought that it was a good idea so I could figure out what was going on with her. Maybe she was biting her own ankles in her sleep. That night, Bethany woke me up and asked if I would get her some water. She didn't want to get up because she was afraid the elf would attack her. I didn't want to leave the poor girl in there alone, so I told her she had to come with me. She didn't want to come, but I wouldn't let her stay. I should have listened. Oh, God. Maybe she would still be alive if I had just listened. It's my fault she's dead. When we got by the door, I saw it. The elf was tall, with strange teeth and blank, white eyes. I thought I was imagining it, so I turned on the light. It didn't go away. I know I should have tried to leave, but instead, I tried to take a picture of it. As soon as I did, it started to run at us so fast. I could barely see it. Everything was happening so fast. Bethany, who had been standing so still, pushed me out of the room so hard that I fell to the floor. The door slammed shut. All I could hear was a voice screeching so loudly that I could hardly hear Bethany's screams. It sounded like the voice was saying, "Merry Christmas." But it wasn't pronounced right. It sounded like Merry Christmas. Anyway, I was trying to get back in the room, but the door was locked. I tried to kick it down, but I wasn't strong enough. I ran into the kitchen to find something to break the door as I called the police. They thought it was a joke. I don't understand how they didn't hear the screaming and how her parents did not wake up. I found a brick and decided it was good enough to make a hole in the door or something. Suddenly, I heard a ripping sound, and the screams and screeches finally stopped. I cautiously opened the door, which somehow unlocked, and the walls, and the bed, and all her toys and furniture were bright red, soaked in Bethany's blood. On the floor, the elf was hovering over Bethany's corpse. It was split in half vertically, and the elf was wearing her intestines around its neck and eating them. I screamed louder than I had ever screamed before. Bethany's mother finally came out of her room and saw what had happened. She didn't even make a sound. She just stared at the horrifying scene. We closed the door and put things in front of it so it wouldn't open. We went into the living room to wait for the police. When the police finally arrived, they questioned us and her husband, who hadn't heard a thing. I couldn't say anything. It was like a dream, so unreal that I just sat there staring off into space. The only one who told the police what happened was my sister. The police removed the barricade from the front of Bethany's room. But when they opened the door, nothing was there. The blood was gone. The blood, the elf, Bethany, everything. The room looked completely normal. Besides snow blowing in from the open window. Everything was gone. Like magic. The police started a search party. They thought that she ran away. After everyone left, I stood in her room alone and cried. I heard the sound of bells, and then I heard the elf whispering, "Merry Christmas." I ran out of there. It's been a year now since Bethany's death. After Bethany died, my sister's mental health began to deteriorate. She boarded up the doors and windows of Bethany's old room. She never slept anymore. We found her trying to cut open her stomach several times. And finally, we had to have her live in a mental hospital, where she ended up killing herself by making a noose out of her bed sheets. Now, I'm the only one who knows what happened. Everyone else still thinks she's missing. I don't go near that house anymore. And I can't bring myself to talk to Bethany's father. But no matter what I do to forget what happened, I can't. Sometimes I still hear the elf's voice at night. And I'm afraid it's going to kill me next. It's almost Christmas. During the night of December 2nd, 1985, a handful of witnesses from varying states, countries, and providences would report a celestial event undocumented by most astrologists at the time, including those of the IAU, the International Astronomy Union. Many who reported on the event falsely claimed it to be a sighting of Halley's Comet, which was predicted to pass the Earth in 1986. While sightings of Halley's Comet did occur sometime 2 months later, that particular meteor would not be in its perihelion stage, the stage where the comet is closest to the sun, until February, making the event highly unlikely to be Halley's. Furthermore, cited reports suggested that the celestial body dove towards the Earth at a steep angle with an estimated trajectory directed at somewhere in northern Canada, something that Halley's Comet has never done, given its documentation dating back to 240 BC and an upcoming visit in 2062. While many cite the 1758 apparition of Halley's Comet on Christmas Day as a logical explanation as to the December 1985 sighting, others have concluded these claims to be inaccurate, citing the logic as misleading. Other theories as to the celestial being's identity cite anything from meteorites to UFOs, with some explanations being logical and others being downright science fiction. According to an obscure, regionally based newspaper from the territory of Nunavut, Canada, one eyewitness offered a rather unorthodox explanation. Upon entering a clearing in the middle of the boreal forest in northern Canada, 58-year-old Nunavut resident and local hunter Arthur Christie noticed a crater in the earth, which he claimed was created by the formerly overhead celestial object, which he assumed to be Halley's Comet. After approaching the crater, the hunter noticed a rather large deer amidst the smoldering hole. The deer, with large antlers and wide glassy eyes, was seemingly unharmed despite the surrounding crater. After a short deliberation, Christie decided to mercifully shoot the animal, both to collect a bounty and also to avoid any painful injury it might have sustained while attempting to flee the steep crater. Rather than using the beast for venison or skinning it for buckskin, Christie chose to taxidermy the animal, mounting its head on the wall in his basement. The hunter remarked that the deer was unlike any critter he had ever seen, and he had seen a lot of them. According to Christie, the deer was extremely difficult to gut, as its skin was like rubber. Unlike most of the deer he had killed in the past, this deer, which he nicknamed Hallie, felt inorganic to the touch, as if it wasn't an actual deer at all. The animal, despite the bullet wound directly through the skull and cranial cavity, appeared to never stop breathing or blinking, despite its clinical death. Yet, regardless of the strangeness of the animal's biology, Christie noted that, upon opening up the buck, its features were normal-looking, as if anatomically correct. 2 hours after mounting the animal's head on the wall in his basement, Christie reported a low, whirring sound emitting from the static head. The sound, which perpetually lasted for weeks according to Christie, sounded like a high-pitched microwave. Despite routinely checking the head, Christie never found a source of the sound, resorting to constantly shutting the basement door in order to sleep, both to dampen the sound and to close off the still, blinking head, which he claimed was watching him. Many rumors began circulating regarding the strange phenomenon as word around the Nunavut area and greater parts of northern Canada took credence. In the face of all the attention the mysterious head was garnering, Christie refused to publicly show off the deer. Being the private and isolated man that he was, many assumed that, due to his media resistance, Christie was likely a fraud. However, the hunter offered a different explanation. It might be a satellite, Christie claimed. It's been watching us, I think. And I don't want it to hurt anybody. Christie reportedly locked the basement to his home in Iqaluit. When asked about where he supposed the deer-shaped satellite originated, Christie shrugged. "I think someone or something smarter than us made Hallie. Why? Hell, I wish I knew." Many who heard about it at the time began relating the story of the space-bound deer to the Christmas celebration, given the convenient timing of the incident. Using the 1823 book, The Night Before Christmas, as a source of inspiration, the rather off-color comparison sparked the nickname Comet to be exchanged for Hallie, alluding to a name given to one of Santa's legendary reindeer. Though the interest in Comet only grew in the small town of Iqaluit and the greater Nunavut area, the story would take one final sharp and unexpected turn. Arthur Christie was reported missing on December 25th, 1985. The local Iqaluit police commented that foul play was an unlikely possibility, as there was no evidence of a break-in. No theft was reported from Christie's residence, except for the disappearance of the Comet head, which was never discovered. Some claim that Christie fled with a taxidermized animal, fearful to be discovered as a scam artist. Others believe Christie was abducted, having been targeted by Comet's creators. Who or what might have taken Christie remains a mystery to this day, as Arthur Christie was never seen again. Moreover, many who believe in the more fantastical theories surrounding the celestial deer, such as its ties to the legend of Santa Claus, believe Comet was not the only one in existence. Perpetual darkness lingered at the top of the world. Thick ice, frigid air, and snow covered the lifeless mountainscape. However, the endless night did not go unchallenged. A single source of light illuminated the sky and drove back the darkness. Nestled between two snow-covered mountains, a little cottage sat with puffy, billowing smoke rising from its chimney. Ignoring the fact that the nearest civilization was thousands of miles away, to the casual eye, the house was simply a warm and welcoming home. Still, one might ask themselves, what an odd thing to find in such a bleak place. How could such a thing come to be? Like most things found in the North Pole, not everything is as it appears. The land was unforgiving and cruel. It could take your life within minutes. Only a select number of creatures were given permission to live in this harsh and relentless wilderness. All others who entered this domain did it of their own accord, such as the residents of this tiny little home. However, these individuals were like no other, and with a little bit of magic at their disposal, they lived happy and joyful lives. At first glance, it would appear that it was nothing more than a simple, ordinary home, inhabited by an elderly couple who loved each other dearly. If this were your conclusion, you would be mistaken. In reality, a magical secret existed below, for the small house was much more than meets the eye. The little house was not just a home, but the tip of a mystical workshop hidden beneath the ice. For centuries, children all around the world found joy from the efforts of the hidden workshop. All year round, tiny magical hands toiled and labored to create toys and playthings for all the good children of the world. Elves, the last of the magical creatures from old, dwelt within its walls and used their mystical nature to create wondrous and joyful things for Christmas morning. 3 days after the winter solstice, the old man would put on his heavy coat and boots, take to the air, and deliver his Christmas joy to every last child. Like everything in the cosmos, there must be a balance. For every night, there must be a day. Every beginning has an end. And with every kind child, there was a naughty little boy or girl to be found. Far below the bright lights, singing and happy elves creating and building new fantastic toys, there was another workshop. There, the warmth of the hearthstones could not reach. While the purpose of the upper workshop was to bring happiness, the other was dark and sterile. It, too, had a purpose. It was here where the masses of cheap and easily broken toys were made. There was no love put into these objects. Never would a child's eyes brighten with wonder and awe upon seeing these gifts on Christmas morning. In his wisdom, the old man knew that even a naughty child should not be forgotten during this time of goodwill. However, the old man was no fool and had no desire to waste his resources on such unsatisfying tasks. This responsibility was handed to the banished and exiled elves that inhabited the deepest bowels below the workshop. Those with selfish hearts and greedy desires, stripped of their immortality, they wasted away in the dark, with only the trinkets and flimsy materials to pass the time. Ergra Ita sat in the poorly lit corner of a tattered workbench. His focus was entirely devoted to the old and worn piece of brass in his hands. The clangs of his hammer hitting metal rang out and echoed through the dark halls and passageways. He pounded the brass sheet relentlessly until the metal slowly began to surrender its shape and bend to Ergra's design. Suddenly, the hammer flew out of the mad elf's grasp. He examined his limp hand, trying to will it back into his control. Fury filled his heart as he watched the necrotic flesh slough off his bony hand. He didn't have much time. His other hand was weak, but still capable of grasp. He reached into his toolbox and removed a long, warped nail and stabbed it into the back of his paralyzed hand. He pushed on the nail head until its tip broke through the skin and emerged through his palm. Immediately, the pain surged and shot up his arm. The thick and rigid tendons loosened within his hand, giving him temporary use of his digits once more. The elf picked up his hammer and resumed molding the shape of the brass plate. With each impact upon the brass, he poured his rage into his creation. How ironic that the product of his tireless work was meant for the ones he hated the most. His deteriorating body was fading fast. He possessed just enough magic to fuel the curse he would cast upon the object. When finished, his gift would be placed with the other junk toys and cheap trinkets. It would make its way to them and find a child on Christmas morning. The curse will take hold and slowly begin tearing apart their lives. It will channel their essence back to him and reignite his immortality. The object would pass from one child, then to another, century after century. He had just enough magic left to evoke his curse. Ergra had once lived and worked above. Like any other elf before him, he loved nothing more than to create beautiful and wondrous toys and gizmos. However, in his heart, he wished that he could keep some of his creations for himself. One day, his eyes fell upon a beautiful music box his friend Lahila had created. The music box was extraordinary, meant as a gift to a king's firstborn. It was magnificent. Crafted from oak wood, it bore an elaborate gold design on each of its sides. When opened, a figurine of 3 children danced hand in hand to a beautiful lullaby around a magnificent Christmas tree. Ergra Ita had never desired anything more in his entire life. It filled his heart with jealousy. He became resentful that this precious and rare treasure would go to an undeserving human infant. The little girl didn't deserve it. It should go to him, he thought. So, under cover of darkness, Ergra slipped into the work area and took the music box. Unable to sleep and anxious to put the finishing touches on his prized creation, Dlahila decided to return to the workshop. To his surprise and shock, he caught the elf attempting to steal the precious music box. Dlahila was enraged, for greed and thievery amongst elves were extremely offensive and not tolerated. Ergra begged his friend not to report his transgression, but Dlahila was unmoved by the pleas and turned to tell the others of Ergra's crime. Desperate, Ergra did the only thing left for him to do. He grabbed a hammer and brought it down on his friend's head, over and over again, until no more life remained in the broken body. Despite his meticulous efforts to conceal his crime, he could not escape the sight and wisdom of the old man. Humiliated and dishonored, the elf was banished from the workshop, and his precious music box was taken from him and given to the little princess. Stripped of his immortality, Ergra Ita was cast into the cold and dark corridors of the other workshop to spend his remaining days, never to create a beautiful thing again. As the seasons passed, his hatred for all children grew and ate away at his sanity. He gritted his teeth, knowing that the children of man were given everything and he had nothing. Hunched over his work, Ergra feverishly worked to complete his masterpiece. He stared down at the anvil and hammered down on the brass. Each strike brought the faces of a child into his mind. It lives in warmth. The blunt hammer formed the metal into a hollow cylinder. It stuffs its face with sweets and treats. Stumpy legs were welded into place. It gets everything it asks from Mommy and Daddy. A malformed head and crooked ears took shape. It gets anything its little heart desires. The brass surface was scrubbed of debris and grime. It gets everything it wants. Small turquoise stones were fixed to the brass body. I hate it. One glimmering red ruby stone was bound to the left side of the figurine's head. I hate it. Finally, a second red ruby was embedded into the surface on the face's other side. I hate them all! In the glow of the fire, Ergra held up the brass figurine. It was a disturbing representation of a rabbit. Its body was a lattice of criss-crossed brass strips, bejeweled with a pale blue turquoise stone at each intersection. Its head was malformed and gave the impression of a dead thing instead of a pleasant rabbit full of life. He placed the atrocious thing upon an open silver locket that contained a mirror on each of the hinged inner sides. With the rabbit figurine facing one of the mirrors, he carefully opened a vial that held a clear fluid. It was lymph. The lymph, from an elf, was the source of magic that flowed through their bodies, like that of blood from the second set of unique arteries found within its own circulatory system, and pumped by a very special second heart. Only a few tiny drops fell out of the vial. It splashed onto the figurine and mirrored locket, illuminating them with a golden glow. Ergra closed his eyes and spoke the words of Wormwood in his elfin tongue. The clear liquid turned black and stained the surface of both the rabbit statuette and silver locket. The glow turned a deep purple, then slowly faded. Pleased with the outcome, he gently placed a cloth over the object without making eye contact to obscure it from sight, and ever so carefully placed it in a small box decorated with holiday cheer. Finished with his work, Ergra turned to leave, pushing past the corpses of several elves hanging upside down from the support beams of the other workshop. Their lifeless bodies drained completely of every last drop of magical lymph from slit throats. Ergra's calculation had been correct. He had just enough magic to fuel the curse placed on the object. The mad elf smiled and began to laugh. For the first time in a very long time, Ergra Ita's heart filled with anticipation at the approach of Christmas morning. The little girl sat in a large pile of torn wrapping paper from the many gifts she found under the Christmas tree. On the morning of December 22nd, Gabby awoke earlier than everyone else. She went downstairs and glared at the many presents that continuously tempted her. It was as if they teased and mocked her every time she looked at the colorful and beautiful wrapping paper. She would receive such a terrible scolding from her parents, but she couldn't wait any longer. At first, it would only be one gift she opened. Then it became two, then another, and another. Before she knew it, all of her presents had been opened. Despite getting everything she had asked for, the desire for more still was not satisfied. When Gabby stood, a small gift next to the base of the Christmas tree caught her eye. She could have sworn it had not been there before. The wrapping paper was worn and yellowed with age. Written in big words was a tag that said, "To Gabriella." It was like no other, and she surely would have seen it before now. Puzzled, she removed the wrapping paper and found a box that contained a smaller, sealed box and a scroll. She opened the scroll and read, "Congratulations, lucky one. You are the proud owner of Pepe, the rabbit. Pepe loves you and will be your best friend in the whole world. Pepe is a friend like no other, and he will give you everything your heart desires. To be Pepe's friend, you must listen to him and never disobey the following instructions. Number 1. Place Pepe on his locket facing the mirror. Number 2. Never look Pepe in the eyes. He is ever so bashful and only likes to see you through his mirror. Number 3. You may ask anything of Pepe 3 times. In 3 days' time, he will grant any and all that you asked of him. Number 4. Never look Pepe in the eyes. It bears repeating. He does not like it and will be upset if you disobey this rule. Remember, lucky little boy or girl, Pepe loves you. He loves you more than anything else in the whole wide world. Pepe will make sure that no one will ever hurt you again. And if you love Pepe, you will listen to him and do whatever he asks of you. Pepe loves you, and no one can ever come between you and him. Pepe loves you.